right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting, the special meeting of the Board of Finance. Oh, it's a special meeting.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Next
Okay,
week.
special meeting of September 25th, 2024 to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we will not amend the agenda for an executive session.
Nope.
All right.
You're on, FYI, it's on, just a little delayed online.
Okay. Thanks, Gwen. We have tonight, order of business, we have our first monthly report for fiscal year 2025, one supplemental appropriation. The second reading and approvals on policy review, preliminary budget discussion, with a focus on Board of Finance goals and debt service modeling, and then the approval of the minutes. We will start with the finance director's report from Amy. So Amy, why don't you begin?
Yep. So you have your normal supplemental appropriations, your grant applications, savings initiatives, which you can read through. There's nothing of significance there that you're not already aware of. I'm just gonna give you one update on the fraud risk assessment. We did pick a winning vendor. It's the consulting department of Clifton Larson Allen, who is our current auditors. We just received the statement of work yesterday, so we'll probably review that in the next few days, go back and forth, and then hopefully get a contract out by next week.
So you will need a supplemental appropriation for that, correct? You don't have money.
No, the fraud risk assessment was part of the fiscal year 24 or 25, 24 budget.
But the supplementary request, we do anticipate in
That I'm putting in as part of year end, so yes,
Okay.
when that comes.
All right, perfect.
Moving on to the financials, if you go down to page 4, you'll see at the end of August, we were about 49% received in revenues. The majority of that obviously are tax collections, we get about 50% for the July period and then the remainder in the January period. So pretty right on target there. And then a couple of items of note that Lisa had mentioned when we went through budget discussion is the agenda prep, is the police department and Parks and Rec. The police department, traffic tickets, permits, things of that nature, but the majority of it, along with the Parks and Rec, is our shared staff with the BOE, and that is only paid quarterly to us. So that will show up at the end of September. Any questions on revenues?
Let's pause for a second on revenues.
It's pretty straightforward.
Let me see. Can you quickly on Board of Ed, we received 14,000 in revenue?
Yeah, so that's for our building rentals.
Okay, all right. Great, any other questions on revenues?
Where does the, we're budgeting for the year almost $8 million. What accounts for most of that?
$8 million for the Board of Education. That's our ECS grant, and then our tuition from outside.
That comes into the general fund, not to the Board of Ed. So that's one of the few things that comes through this board. All right.
And then moving on to expenditures on page 7, about 9% spent to date, a little over 11 million. Nothing really on here that sticks out to me with only 2 months of expenditures to date, so no trends to look at, nothing that's sticking out. So if you have any specific questions, happy to answer them.
Is there some seasonality to these, Amy? Because
Yes.
Okay, that's what I would expect, because you'd expect it to be a little more than 9 or 10% right now, right?
But you wouldn't expect it to be 29% or 22% or 18.
Right.
Okay, or we have some of them which are that. Amy, can you speak to some of those variances like Eno Hall 29%, finance 19%, assessor 18%, and tax and technology at 22%?
Yeah, so I took a look at some of those. So information technology, some of our software subscriptions were all paid in full because we don't pay those on a monthly basis. So that's a little higher this time of year. Same thing for the finance department is we paid our Munis contract in full at the beginning of the year, and then we are also having overtime right now trying to get through the audit and year end. The assessor's office, kind of the same thing. Same thing with the tax department. The ones that you will see that are different, where it's just not upfront payments for software or one-time contracted services, is the police department, the emergency management, the other buildings, and the landfill. So those are all of our CNR transfers where there's capital paid for by the operating budget, and those transfers were all done at the beginning of the year. So it'll show a spike in the beginning of the year and then it'll come down.
And for Board of Ed only being at 5%, I assume that's how, that's the pattern of how teachers are paid in the summer, is that what's happening there?
Right, so those are only the 12-month employees, so your administrators and your finance staff that are paid, and then when teachers come on, they only come on starting in September.
Got it.
So you'll see a huge uptick.
One of the things I did ask Amy to do and that we'll see on future reports is to add a column. We have actuals of 8/31/2024 and show an actual of 8/31/2023 so that we can see, oh, this is
great.
pretty typical. It's over, pretty typical, it's under, so that
That'd be helpful.
that will help with that. In terms of, before we move on from that, we did have some information on the Board of Education year-end projections 2024. Can you fill in the full board, just to make sure everyone's on the same page?
So we are closed out on the Board of Ed side. And when we were finalizing our year-end accounts, the deficit accounts that we spoke about, the special ed transportation, the out-of-district tuitions, all of those came to fruition as anticipated. There was definitely a large deficit related to those. We had some good salary savings. We had some good savings from the spending freeze. And then one thing that was a surprise, if you will, was our health insurance benefits line. So that came in well under budget by about $1 million, so it gave us a surplus of about $500,000 on the Board of Ed side. We had a lot of terminations that happened during the year, and we had $1 million in coverage come off of our books. The coverage that came on to replace those employees was only $600,000, so it was people with higher plans and then people with lower plans came on. We also had a substantial number of decreases in coverage offset by the increases in coverage, a lot more. And in addition, we had planned for a cliff because we were going to use some of our health insurance funds. So we had planned for the cliff to offset that, and we didn't need it. So with all of that, we had a good surprise with our health insurance, and we are not in a deficit.
I mean, so this, you've explained it to me, but to the public, obviously we do monthly reports with the intention of seeing these trends and not being surprised or discovering them at year end. And can you talk about why we didn't, what happened there that we find out 2 months later instead of it's an 800,000 variance. So can you talk about, we were thinking 300 deficit, we're 500 ahead, so it's.
Well, we thought we might close it, so it's really the $500,000 surprise. But yeah, so we had transitioned over from Finance Plus to Munis. So in our Finance Plus financials, the way that payroll would post, we would have a portion of it to the liability account, a portion of it to the expense account, and then we have to do a manual journal entry to true up those accounts, and then it would increase our expenditures. So I kept including that in my projections, and then when Munis went live, my deputy finance director actually did it so that we didn't have to do an adjustment anymore, so everything is trued up as we go.
So that is a situation that's a one-time in the transition to Munis. We don't anticipate that problem going forward. We don't need to change the way we're reviewing monthly reports.
Right, and I only go quarterly when I do like the in-depth review anyways, but that's nothing I would have caught until year end, which is when I caught it.
And there's a new law, just for members of the public out there. It used to be that any surplus would go back to the general fund, but there's a new law out there that was just passed, and that gives the Board of Ed full control of those savings. They can return it to the general fund to reimburse the town for the support the town has given the Board of Ed over the last few years, the last two deficits, Latimer and the bleachers support, or they can take it and put it in the non-lapsing fund by themselves. They don't need our approval to do that transfer. Once it's in the non-lapsing fund, they do not need our approval to spend it. It's a non-appropriation fund for them, so they can just spend it without an appropriation. So I think they were considering that last night. Do we know what they
voted to put it in non-lapsing.
okay.
So what does that mean, that won't become a good guy for us in the next,
Correct.
okay?
Well,
Or
I mean,
it might not become a good guy.
so right now, there hasn't been any discussion on its potential uses. I know internally, there's discussion on making sure special ed is all good before we quote unquote release it. But I think that the Board of Education is open to discussion during budget on what to do with it.
I mean, it's a source of revenue for them, whether we use it or not. It could be an offset to some of their expenditures. So I mean, it will be part of budget discussions
Right.
because it's like a special revenue fund. It's a pool of money that they have access to that they don't need to tax for.
Understood. I guess I just, given the pressures that we have on mill rate and everything else, it would seem that we would wanna take that into account versus just finding some other place to spend it. Realizing that they're aware of that, but, it just seems like for the public to know that even though we don't have say-so on that, it seems like connecting those dots is an important thing for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll treat it like every other special revenue fund at this point. When we know it's there, that's money that doesn't need to be taxed for.
Right.
Obviously, if it's irregular money, we wouldn't want to put it towards the operating budget, but towards a capital expenditure would be, or a variable expense. So that's what the thinking is there. But it's important for everyone to be aware of that. It is a fairly significant change in the law. Amy, one of the things, can you give us an update on how the audit is going? Are we on time, looking
Yeah,
like
we're on
things are
track.
going well?
So Board of Ed is completely done and closed. We have until next week to finish on the town side. So as long as the trial balances to the auditors next week, they will do what they have to do and we will be able to issue by the end of December.
And the other thing, one of the things this board did in the during the budget cycle is we talked about our intention to assign general fund dollars as a cliff balance for the health funds in the fiscal year 2026 budget. Given that we're trending so well, or we did in the last year, I would be interested in understanding what trends are this year and how that might impact whether we need to assign those dollars or we could free them up for some other either capital expense or other mill rate mitigation. So could we get that for?
Yeah, I can provide that when we report out on your end. I'll have all of the IPNR booked and everything for that.
And also in quarterly, just trends when
Sure.
we get that. In October, we'll have October's gonna be a long meeting, so eat before you come. We'll have the quarterly report and we have year-end close and transfers and encumbrances. That's just gonna be a long meeting. So that's when we might take a break in between. Board of Ed, in terms of what did we budget for the reimbursement rate on the Board of Ed for special education? Did we do 68%?
I think we just did it based on prior year. I think our prior year was 2.5. We knew we were having some kids come off, so we did about 2.4. We don't do an exact calculation because we don't know who's coming on.
No, I mean the reimbursement rate from what were we assuming the reimbursement rate from the state to be?
Right, for the excess cost. Yeah, we didn't use a rate. We used just a general.
The total dollars, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. And when do we get our first reimbursement from them?
We have to file by December 1st, and then the money usually comes in by the end of February.
So we have no idea. Okay. And they budgeted, I'm assuming the state did the same thing, a level dollar amount, and if there are lots of people who want it, we get less. Do we know that?
Not sure.
I
It's
don't
always a surprise every year. Sometimes they
check on the
increase it
list
on
on
us,
that.
sometimes
Right.
they decrease it on us.
So that's gonna be an unknown going into the budget. Any other questions? Oh, I did have one more question, but I'll open it up to the board. On union settlements, I talked with Amy about how we handle that. Right now, a lot of money, when there's a settlement, some of the money is in contingency, and in the past, we've transferred at year end to make whole departments after the negotiations, but we talked with Amy about doing that transfer after the settlements occur so that it doesn't look like departments are running in a deficit. And so that will be one change we'll see in the new fiscal year. And you're looking at me funny. So we budget salary, when there's a union negotiation and we don't know what the salary is gonna be increased, they budget some amount in the departments and some amount in contingency. And when the union settlement, we pay the contract. So there's a transfer, and if we don't have enough money to pay the contract, we go into reserves because we're legally obligated to pay it. So it's just one of the, doing the transfer early so that we know we cleaned it up.
When have we done the transfer in the past?
Year end.
Oh.
Okay. All right, so we are now ready for the supplemental appropriation. Oh, Mark, you were there and then you're there, okay.
Apologies for being late, Chair. I was up at a EDC meeting, so
Very important.
back and forth, but lead on.
Okay, the board is being asked, and we have with us also Chief Nick Bolter. The board is being asked to consider a motion to approve a supplemental appropriation for the town's Axon contract in the amount of $14,502 to be funded by the private duty funds being held in the Capital Reserve Fund. This is for a 10-year contract for an interview recording system, tasers, and body-worn camera dashboard cameras under 3 separate agreements. Except for a few exceptions in state law, multi-year appropriations are not permitted generally, unless there is an annual opt-out option, making the annual payment contingent upon Board of Finance, and in this case, referendum approvals, because we go to referendum on the budgets. So I wanted to ask Mr. Nelson to please confirm that this contract contains this opt-out language, and the one question I had posed in advance to Mark yesterday is if we find a cheaper alternative, is that a basis for our ability to opt out, or are we locked into the contract so long as we need the services?
It's a little bit of both, Chair. I'll defer to the chief on this, but just by way of background, we essentially re-upped the existing 2 contracts to capture savings over the upcoming 10 years. And the reason we're in front of you tonight for the supplemental is because we're underfunded in the current year, that amount. Overall, and Nick can chief to speak to this, but about 200,000 in savings roughly. There are off ramps for a total lack of appropriation, so subject to appropriation authority, of course. The quirk that I struggle with the framing of the question is, your question was if you find a cheaper alternative. I'm not reading the contract as allowing an out for that, because presumably you would appropriate for it, albeit less, but I'm gonna defer to the chief on this. But my own view is that we can't get out simply because we find a cheaper alternative. This was a negotiated 10-year deal that looked at what the anticipated costs would be in the out years, and by locking it in now, we have the savings against the future costs. I'd also just add that we're looking at body cams. This is for technology that we are likely to need for and depend on greatly for the duration. But Chief, do you want to fill in the blanks on that?
Yeah, I mean, everything sounds exactly what my understanding as well. We have 3 products from Axon, and we have had several of these products for a few years, and the contracts did not line up. And Axon basically said to us after we inquired about consolidating and doing an extended time period, that they were projecting it would cost about $1.5 million over 10 years. And if we were to lock in now with 2024 pricing, we would save about $200,000 over the course of 10 years. In looking at the product itself and us being actively involved in the different options that are out there, this is the best one for us, and we expect that this will be down the line. Some aspects of this become a little bit cheaper, some aspects become more expensive as the equipment gets better. But this is the best thing for us. It's a mandated requirement for us, not just an opt-in, which we would be seeking as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for us, and so again, over about 10 years, we're saving roughly $200,000.
How does the contract work over 10 years in terms of the equipment we're getting? Are we buying equipment that it will last 10 years, or is
No.
something gonna be replaced annually, or how does it work?
So it gets replaced on a regular basis, so I'll give you, for instance, we just received these new cameras this past summertime. And in 2.5 years from now, we will be getting a new camera. If this breaks, if it doesn't work, it's all under part of the contract, so we get that replaced. And the same thing happens with our taser as well. When there's an upgrade in the software components, we get that. When there's an upgrade in the quality of the camera, we get that. If they move to a completely different model, then that's usually not a move that we would get with this deal. But given that it's a 10-year contract, they regularly change things, and we've had some really good experience with this, and these are tied right into our dash cameras and our tasers, and they all speak together.
And what is your understanding of the conditions under which we'd be permitted to opt out of the contract?
My understanding is the same as the town managers, that
I admit I didn't understand.
so it's if it doesn't get appropriated.
Yep.
Then there's no requirement. But the question was, if the town chose not to appropriate it based on there's a cheaper product out there, a less expensive product out there, that is probably not the intention of that opt-out.
But the language, well, I mean, you don't have it in front of you, but you're understanding
I
it's
don't,
just
and it's-
contingent on
Yeah,
the town appropriating the funds.
yes.
Subject to the appropriation, right?
And it's multiple pages. It was reviewed by our town attorney prior
Yeah.
to his sign off on it, so.
Go up to a certain number of officers, like if the force gets bigger, it
We have to
allows
add
for-
on, yeah, we would add on, and we have done that like over the last couple of years, when we have added
Mhm.
officers on, we have added that to the contract, so it will not negate the contract, you can add on. So for instance, if we decided that we needed another cruiser with a camera in it, even if we didn't add officers, then we can add that on. Right now, most of our officers have tasers. There are at least 2 of us who do not have it. If for some reason we wanted to add that to the contract, we can do that without creating a whole new contract.
Mark or Chief, are you aware, or Amy aware of any municipalities that have 10-year contracts for any reason?
I did the same thing in Poughkeepsie, Chair. Almost the exact same thing, saved almost $500,000 in that case. Much bigger job, much bigger force. I was familiar with the re-up process that Axon does. I can also tell you that the chief, many years, spoke very highly of Axon as the leader in the technology there. In fact, I think there may only be one other, competitor, but they are, by far and above the leader, expected to be the leader. We went through a similar review from a procurement and from a legal perspective, before we did it then. So this was not new to me. When the chief brought it to me, it made a lot of sense, and we're looking forward to the savings. And as Nick said, if the technology it changes, which it will, that's covered. So you get the next camera or the next version or whatever it is. All of the maintenance. Some things do become cheaper on the technology side, so clearly that's a very good question that the board is asking. But there's also changes that are go the other way, that wouldn't impact the town because we've got this contract. So it made good sense to us from a managerial operational perspective to lock this in and come to the boards for approval.
I'm aware of at least one town that once they heard about this 10-year contract, they went and sought this as well.
Is Axon the only company that, are there other companies that might have offered us a 10-year contract if we had?
It's not the same exact equipment, and I'll give you one example which was very important to us, is there's tremendous redundancy built into the storage of the software. So they have 3 sites that it gets stored at throughout the country. So we're not worried about it being stored here without a backup. We're not worried about it being stored at one other location and there being an issue with that equipment. It's stored at 3 different areas. So they are the leading company in this technology. There would, in all likelihood, be less expensive options, but they don't offer the same exact technology, and they certainly don't talk with our other equipment like this does.
did you go follow the normal procurement procedure to do this?
They did it when it was originally sent out. It was heavily scrutinized, I was part of it.
All right, we haven't heard from you. Any comments?
No questions here. Seems pretty straightforward.
Can I ask what the
Yeah.
private, what's the private duty funds, capital reserve fund, is that, are there other things that we're negotiating that might, between this and other things for the CNR, it's taking a lot out of the balance. Is there anything else that's in negotiations that would use that balance?
Typically the
Not a
upcoming,
negotiation.
No,
no, not negotiations,
Like a
but
contract negotiation, like you were talking with this one?
This would be for their capital budget next year in 2026, we'll reduce that by 14,000.
Right.
Why are we over budget already on this for the current year?
So one contract ends next year, or would have ended next year. Another contract would have ended 3 years from then. Axon was telling us that they're expecting some significant increases in the cost. That would be our cost. So they were saying with the 2 contracts for each of the products that we would have to negotiate over the course of 10 years through 2034, we'd be looking at significant increases. So that's where they put that number up here at 1.5.
So we pay a little bit more in this year's contract to get the 10-year extension.
Not just this year, it goes up next year too, which it would have gone up even more had we renegotiated. It would have gone up significantly more.
So to Todd's point though, 14,000 is a very small number in your $6 million budget, so I would just say we encourage you and we expect you to find that savings during the year so that you can replenish the capital reserve fund. And I have full confidence you'll be able to do that, given your past experience.
Well,
Non-committal.
I can't guarantee you that. I can guarantee you that we look at everything as close as we possibly can.
I would encourage you very strongly, given your past history of having significant savings there. We would like to see that replenished. I do appreciate you coming though for the supplemental appropriation. Are we ready for a motion or are there any other questions? Okay,
Questions?
may I have a motion to approve the supplemental appropriation for the town's Axon contract in the amount of $14,500 to be funded by the private duty funds being held in the capital reserve fund?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Halpin, a second by Mr. Burke. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. All right, thank you.
thanks, Chief.
Thank you. Good work.
And we are now on to our policy review. Amy, can you pull up the investment policy real quick? I just want to bring the board's attention to something that I raised with Amy and that I'm hoping Art Wallace will work on. If you could go to that page 43. Oh, there it is. So under maximum maturities, this is our investment policy. Bert, can you read that out loud? Because you're the best reader. And I cannot, my eyes still aren't great, so if I could have someone help me read
It's a
that.
low bar, Bert. Go ahead.
Yeah. I've always wanted to be the best at something. To the extent possible, the town will try to match its investments with anticipated cash flow requirements.
All good.
The average weighted maturity of all investments exceeding 2 years shall not be more than 5 years, and no more than 25% of the dollar value of those investments may exceed 5 years in duration.
So for me, it was not clear what those investments was referring to or even what that sentence meant. And
Well,
Amy had the same confusion.
It's those investments that exceed 2 years, I think.
I think we could, I'm asking Art Wallace, since you've been working on this, to give that some thought and work with Amy with some language for next
Yeah, I mean, that's
meeting.
how I read it. I think is what you were saying, Bert, is that when you say those investments, you mean in that last line?
Yeah,
Yeah. This is,
I think
this
they're referring
is-
to the ones that are exceeding 2 years.
5%
So if you have the ones that are exceeding 2 years, they cannot be more than 5 years. So the average weighted maturity cannot be more than 5 years, and no more than 25% of those can exceed 5.
Makes sense to me.
I am not understanding what it means.
I guess the question is,
I think you don't wanna include
So if you
it
laddered
in
your
the-
maturities out, right, and you
Right.
said you had some investments, so you had some outflows that were 7 years out, I guess. I think what this is saying is that you could only go out to 5 years, and then even within the portion that you're gonna go out to 5 years, you're gonna average to 5 years. So let's pretend you had some that were 4 years and 5 years and 6 years and 7 years. You couldn't have more than 25% of it exceeding the 5 years, so no more than 25% was in my example, in the 6 or 7 year bucket. This is way beyond what we're doing because we're literally going 3 months and 6 months, right? So I think when this came up, when we looked at it, we said, we're well within inside of this. Like this would actually apply, I think, if we started to get very specific with long duration outflows and we were getting pre-funded for all of those and we tried to match those. We're not doing anything near that. We're trying to,
No, I know
We're
that,
trying
I
to
just
just
wanna
look at
make
it
sure the
anyway.
language is clear, that we all are on the same page as to what it means, so are people comfortable that they understand what that means now with that clarification?
I'm comfortable with it.
that I understand what those investments mean,
Okay,
as far as what Art said.
Yeah, I mean, there's gotta be a maximum amount of dollar value anyways for the average to be
Right.
where it is, so I'm not sure what that is, but 20, that works.
okay. Alright, then we are going on to the changes that were made by Amy on at Mr. Burke's recommendation for the transfer and amendment policy, and that is on, I don't know what page.
Excuse me.
Page 62. And Amy, thank you for numbering those policies, that was helpful. And the changes that we made with the new policy start on 65. And the changes are on page 58.
Right, no, I remember that request. Yes,
Does that capture
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
were looking for?
right, so, yeah, the individual are fine, but at some point, accumulation of them has to
Right,
equal low.
so if there was a windfall thing where people were giving donations, we just wanna stay on top of it for public transparency things. And then on page 71, we had the emergency appropriation policy as expressed in this document supersedes any conflicting languages in other town documents. That's basically, it's emergency appropriations are mentioned in multiple other documents, but there just wasn't time to go through them. And 2 councils have reviewed this language twice, so I feel confident this is the right language at this point.
Except that there's a typo here because,
Is there?
yes, it should say supersedes any conflicting language and it says supersedes and conflicting
Oh.
language.
Okay, with that change? Good catch, I did not see that. Then the one thing I just wanted to bring to the board's attention, when we passed our budget, Appendix A, if you, page 64 lists the names of departments, unless we make a different decision. During the budget, we did make a different decision in talking with Melissa Appleby. The departments we approved are slightly different than the ones in Appendix A. The question is, do we wanna just swap those out or leave it? The language is such that for purposes of this policy, departments are identified below unless modified by the Board of Finance during the annual budget approval. We did modify them. Very similar, one thing we did during the budget process is we separated out finance, tax, and assessment as their own departments. So we could do that by thing or just leave it and then do it during the budget process. I just got that the other day. So does anyone have a preference there? Both work because the policy permits us to do either way. We can make that change later. Everyone okay
If
with?
it allows us to do it either way, which one's the least amount of work?
I think the one that we've already approved, so we don't have to keep going, so we'll substitute, with the motion to substitute the departments as approved during the budget process into the policy, and then those will be it since they were vetted through Melissa.
We'll just make it.
Okay. So we have two minor changes, change the word "and" to "any," and to substitute the departments as approved during the budget process into Appendix A instead of the ones that are listed here. Are there any other changes? Amy had made minor editorial non-substantive, is it fair to say non-substantive changes in the other edits? Okay. With that, may I have a motion to approve the policies with the changes?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you, and I wanna thank Amy and Bert in particular for their work on this policy. This really took almost a year and a half to get done. 2 councils, multiple town managers, Mark and Lee looked at it, superintendent, so it was a heavy lift, so thank you for all your work on that. And I think hopefully it's a good document, clear, and will get us through without having to think too much about stuff like that. All right, moving on. We are now on to the budget discussion. Just a minor update, at the September 10th Board of Education meeting, the schools reported enrollment at 4,069, which was actually a decline of 35 students over the last year. That number may change, those were estimates, we'll get final numbers in October. That is also different than the projections, so it's lower than the projections, so that'll be an enrollment trend to watch as we're coming up. Amy, as you get updated enrollment projections from the Board of Ed, can you just keep advised of any other changes on that?
Yeah, sure. Neil will actually be presenting them at the next Board of Education meeting.
Perfect, so we'll just watch it. Great. I asked Mark to please speak to, and Wendy, you're welcome to speak to it too. The Board of Selectmen has taken some actions in the last few weeks that will reduce revenues about $200,000. So I wanted Mark to just walk us through those and what that means.
Thanks, Chair. So we were able to get in front of the Board of Selectmen with 4 proposed legislative changes to exemptions in various pieces of our tax code, all of which we wanted to get done, or at least in front of the policymakers before October 1st in the new grand list. So what the Chair is referring to is the Board of Selectmen did take favorable action on 4 of the 5 presented potential changes. The only one that failed was the proposal to exempt horses in town. The 4 that passed were an amendment to our senior exemption passed at the Board of Selectmen meeting on Monday. That had been something that had been batted about and worked on by my predecessor, interim town manager Lee Erdman, and also I think had been championed by electeds on both boards. And what it did was it increased the minimum, actually the maximum income that seniors can make and still qualify for that credit, and that is a credit, not an exemption, right? It also increased the exemption slightly, as you'll see in that ordinance. The other, 2 of the others had related to farm equipment, farm property. This increases the exemption for farming and farmers, both on the personal property and on the farm buildings. Both of those changes were enabled by recent state legislation that made it possible for towns to make these changes. I believe that was effective as recently as July. Around the state, some towns moved quickly to do the same thing. We were in the mid-range of the exemption and the changes that we made relative to what the state legislation would have permitted us to do, so we didn't go to the maximum. And we had some very robust public comment, I think, in front of the Board of Selectmen. Wendy can speak to that. Obviously, public hearings on all of these pieces of legislation where the public had the opportunity to come and speak both for and against. I would categorize and characterize the public comment as favorable in all cases. From my perspective, obviously not on the policy side, but I certainly wanted to give our policymakers the opportunity to get this done now. So if they were going to do it, and they did, that we would have the benefit of the ability to budget accordingly, because as the chair indicated, this is an approximate and potential decline on the revenue side of 200, although I would just like to add that our estimates were a little high purposely. We don't wanna underestimate fiscal impact statements when we go to the Board of Selectmen, so you can generally figure that there's a 10 or 15% cushion there, and as we give the board the best information we can, we don't wanna miss that number. I think interestingly, the other one, as I said, two on farming, one on senior, the other one allows some discretion to our assessor to waive penalty for late filing. That was a harder number to estimate what the loss in revenue would be, because obviously it required an estimate of who might file late. And typically the people that file late one year don't necessarily file late the next year. It may have just been something that required their some problem in the family, or they forgot, or hopefully when one files late and gets a penalty in year one, they don't do the same thing in year two. So we had a little trouble, I think, internally coming up with that number, and if that number's high, it's fair to say that the impact is fairly less than the 200 that you're noted. It's certainly not higher, but I think that it was certainly, with respect to the seniors, it was, I won't say overdue, but it was timely to get that done. And again, the most important thing to me and to our team internally on the staff side was to get some clarity behind these. And now we can say definitively there are no additional changes planned. We're good for the foreseeable future in terms of what our taxpaying public might expect, and particularly I think both our senior citizens and our farming community are pleased with the outcome.
So just on the waiver penalty, you were estimating about $125,000. Just to put that in perspective, that's half the tax department's budget.
Yeah,
It's the
it was staff's estimate. I personally didn't agree with it, but I'm gonna overrule it and shoot low, but just for the record, my own estimate is closer to 50. And I'm a former tax collector, so I think I know, but wasn't gonna argue with staff. I depend on those around me.
And anybody can get that, any homeowner is eligible for that?
Yeah, there was a good debate, and I'll defer to Wendy on this about this, but I don't believe it would be fairly, well, I don't wanna speak for you, Wendy.
Were you talking about the senior?
No, we were talking
This
about,
one,
The late filing, so we can all
so
just,
that was only for owners of rental properties, correct? So that was all that a business owner who rents out property, right? That was the only person that it was for, the penalties.
one reason why I didn't think that the estimate was spot on. I thought it was high, but again,
what is the reason we would give someone a break and not everyone?
there isn't one. I think you would give anybody, I mean, the waiver is only if they come forward with the documents, obviously. So
Well, they're keeping their money, I mean, that's money that would be in the town earning interest, it's now not gonna be in the town earning interest for 2 months. So the question is, why would we do that? Can it?
Well, I guess the argument was, it was to help a business who was trying to get their stuff in on time and maybe miss the deadline by a day. And that we're not technically losing penalty dollars, right, that we're inflicting on these businesses, is how I understand it. So it was to give them an opportunity. We discussed, I think we shortened the period, or it's a 30-day period or something to that effect, that they have to collect all their documents to get them in on time. So it's pretty much giving people a little bit more of a chance to get the paperwork in for these businesses that do rental properties. I mean, that's the only group that this applies to. It was presented as an idea, it was an idea that the assessor brought to us to do. Well, we didn't ask for it, so that and the horses were on the assessor's radar, which we entertained to be fair to staff. And we voted to do it. I can't think of any other issues that we discussed with that one, although we did have a lot of discussion about that one too, whether basically, one of the things that came up was making sure that it was done equitably, that it wasn't just like, oh, you're late and you're late too, but we're gonna give it to you, that, Francine assured us that it would follow the protocol that she had to follow and would be fair and equitable. And that if it's not, the Board of Assessment Appeals is another venue, if somebody doesn't, I may be saying this wrong, if it doesn't, they disagree or whatever, the Board of Assessment Appeals, an elected board can weigh in on that opinion. So, I don't know if that made sense what I said, but that's.
If I can just add to, but maybe put a little color on it, I think that, to your point, the revenue obtained from the penalty, it's not revenue in the it's revenue, but the purpose of the penalty from an equity standpoint is to incent and make sure that people file on time. It's not really so that we can depend for budgetary purposes on $100,000 in penalties. The purpose of the statute is to make sure that we have compliance. We think, from an equitable perspective, we agreed with the assessor that if someone comes in and they're 4 or 5 days late, the penalty is significant. And it is, in fact, usurious if someone is only a day late. And if they're a year late, you might say a 20% or a 10% penalty is reasonable. It's not reasonable at all if one of your local businesses is 2 or 3 days late. I think the point was compelling for the Board of Selectmen when we mentioned that we wanted to be equitable and fair to our taxpayers, and that some discretion applied fairly was reasonable.
But if you're a different business and you're a day late, you have to pay the penalty. That doesn't feel very equitable to me.
Well, I'm reminded in Hartford that their revenue included, roughly $3 million a year in interest on delinquent taxes, and as a tax collector, put everybody on payment plans, and the state interest rate was 18%. It was a significant amount of revenue going to the state's capital from interest on delinquent taxes. But you don't want to incent delinquent taxes, do you? You want to make sure that everybody pays their taxes on time. So it's penalties and interest are unique in terms of what emphasis does the municipality put on them for revenue purposes. They're really there as an incentive to do what you should do: file on time and pay on time.
That's right.
And they're not there as primary drivers of our revenue. So I would argue that it's a little different than saying we're going to discontinue fees at a park facility or something.
Well, speeding tickets really there for safety, not to generate revenue.
Right.
And yet we book the revenue for it, so.
I know.
So I don't know, this doesn't feel very equitable to me, but it's not. Go ahead.
What's the reasoning for applying this to only one type of business?
I think it's the only one that the assessor brought to us as being a potential issue. So again, as the first selectman indicated, it wasn't on our radar. The assessor saw that other changes were being made by the legislative body and saw it as an opportunity to bring 2 other issues that have been just simmering on the back burner. One was to if approved, give her some discretion with respect to waiving the penalty from an equity perspective. And the other was this very interesting issue of horses. And I will just say that it failed at the BOS 3-2. It was not a unanimous failure, but the equity argument there, failed. It succeeded with respect to the penalty. But the horses is illustrative because you've got a number of taxpayers who are doing the right thing and declaring their horses and paying the revenue to the town as $2,000. But we know that we've got dozens of others that aren't doing the right thing. And we don't have the ability to go and the joke internally was and chase the horses, nor could we value them accurately, right? So for an equity perspective, the answer that many would say is you need to do a better job of enforcing from an assessment perspective, and you need to go out there and make sure that people who aren't filing and declaring their horses are doing what they should do. But realistically, we don't have the staff or the resources to do it. So from an equity perspective, we recommended, and the assessor recommended to the board, that we not tax the 4 or 5 people that are doing it correctly, because it was the only way to balance the equities. And to the chair's point, had that passed, we'd be reducing revenue. My argument in favor of it was that, yes, but it's the right thing to do. Giving the assessor discretion over the waiver of penalties when applied fairly is the right thing to do for our local businesses. And while it does impact revenue and it has budgetary impacts, it's up to us in management to compensate for that revenue loss, which is exactly what I'd expect your board to tell us we need to do, and we are prepared to do that.
How do people know that this waiver is available? Like, are there people who are coming in paying the penalty and don't know that they could have asked for it?
Well, the waiver wasn't available until it just passed, and I believe it still isn't effective until it's been.
Going forward, how will people?
We are gonna notify the public of all of the changes, particularly, the increase to the senior tax credit, and there'll be, information sent out from my office shortly about all of this. I think it's a 20-day waiting period or something, but we'll be getting that out soon. Excuse me.
That isn't gonna basically just tell people the deadlines are kind of optional?
No, that was something, good point, that was also debated in front of the Board of Selectmen. I think that the opportunity to tell someone that they are eligible for a waiver of the penalty is if they're late and we send out a notice, we haven't received your paperwork yet, that notice could say, and we're still in talks about how we implement the new policy, but you're right, you don't wanna put a message out there that you can be late and ask for a waiver, but you also have to let folks know as they are late, I think, that, and I haven't heard from the assessor on how we would exactly do that, but at that point, you send them a letter and say, you're late, and if you get it in by this date, we could waive the penalty. If not, the penalty is there.
Can I, we had a lot of questions on this, you could rewatch it. It was, presented to us as asked for by staff, so we entertained it specifically to what was asked for by staff. What I would suggest is you get Francine in the room and ask her because she made a really good case for it. We asked a lot of similar questions that you guys are asking. That would be my recommendation because she was very helpful that night and she could probably share enough information to have you think it was a good move.
That's a fair point, but if you can answer, are there specific criteria for the waivers? Or is it?
They have to file by a certain date and it gives them a couple extra months to file by.
Yeah, it's such a de minimis period that there isn't like, well, there's 6 reasons that you would qualify. It's across the board.
So then it is an optional payment on time.
If they give us the documentation that they should have given us, and they do it within that extra time, then yes.
So that's just an extension of the.
Essentially, yeah, and I would also point out that the state in its infinite wisdom passed legislation deferring this issue to the local municipality. So it is for the local jurisdiction to decide whether they want to empower either their Board of Assessment Appeals or their assessor or both with that limited discretion. Or do they wanna hold firm that, if you miss the deadline by a day, you're paying this pretty significant penalty?
What we just heard from you is that they don't really have to give an excuse. Anyone who just asks for it will get it. Okay, so that's interesting. Could you please track for us, I'd be interested in seeing prior to this being passed, how many people were delinquent and versus after it's passed, how many people are delinquent, so that we can sort of track. The whole purpose of this was to get people to do it on time and to see if they're filing on time, or
Well,
we just say.
the delinquency reports track the payment of the dollars, they don't track the timeliness of the report, but we'll do our best. I think what you're looking for
Well,
is.
you'll know who was delinquent last year and how many are delinquent.
We'll
after the
we'll
bill
know how
passed.
many penalties were applied.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Oh, no, penalties are gonna be discretionary though in the future. So we wanna know who didn't make the deadline, how many people didn't make the
I got you, yes.
deadline.
We can do that.
Okay, so just in terms of revenue for the public, as a reminder, our grand list projections, although we will get an update in October, were about 900,000 new revenue. The state mandate a motor vehicle assessment, we're anticipating that will reduce revenue to the town by 430,000. State mandate on total disability for veterans will reduce revenue to the town. It's not being reimbursed to the town by about 200,000. Board of Selectmen action, reductions in revenue of about 200,000, which will leave us with net new revenue 56,000 going into the fiscal year 2026 budget. So that's essentially flat at this point. And that's where we'll start. So Amy, the first thing, could you pull up the goals? We had talked about, everyone's had a chance to see them.
I think there's still a small typo in the first one.
Yeah, I did not see, oh, I'm sorry, you know what,
Yeah.
I have not been doing my regular reading, as you know. So we will fix that.
No worries.
Well, I mean, while Amy's pulling it up, or do you wanna just read them out loud?
You mean our best reader?
Our best reader.
The town crier.
Golden books.
So our fiscal year 2026 budget goals. 1. Fund services to maintain a quality of life that residents want at a level residents are willing to pay. 2. A tax increase at or below the Social Security cost of living adjustment. 3. Narrow the gap in mill rate difference with our peer towns. 4. Maintain a strong bond rating. 5. Continue adherence to Board of Finance policies and Government Financial Officers Association best practices. 6. Have conservative but reasonable revenue budgeting. 7. More objective expenditure budgeting. More than in the past. 8, reduce borrowing until the grand list improves. And finally, support spend to save initiatives that deliver quality education and town services at lower costs.
And I included, just for members, as sort of a fun experiment, I said, what are good Board of Finance goals into AI? And they spat out quite a list, which I thought was interesting and actually not terrible. So I included those as well for your review. But I just wanted to see if folks are comfortable with that. They're based on what members have said over the last few months. I don't think there's anything there that's surprising or hasn't been said. But if I miss something,
Comfortable with the first 9.
yeah, the first 9. I mean, yeah, I just included,
Yeah, no.
if you, is there anything anyone wants?
Is there a need in number 4 to get more specific with what a strong bond rating means, or do we want that to be
Maintain
vague?
a AAA bond rating?
Yeah.
Okay,
Or maintain current, whatever, but yeah.
maintain current AAA, that's a good idea.
And I'm completely fine with it, but 1, 2, and 3 can be in conflict with each other, right?
Okay, absolutely,
And that's the point, but
yeah,
as long as we're all seeing that the
it's a
same way.
three-legged stool,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Absolutely,
I think it's great.
alright, can I have a motion to accept the Board of Finance 2026 Board of Budget Goals?
Subject to those small edits.
Yes,
So moved.
Second.
any further discussion?
I guess, what do they mean? I mean, what do we do with them?
So I think we try and craft our budget around what we're trying to accomplish. You know, are we gonna succeed in all these goals? I don't know.
Okay, I mean,
And I guess the way I think about it, Todd, is, and you guys can correct me if you think about it differently, but as we go down the stretch with conversations and discussions in the process, I think it would be great, you know, to bring these back up, to say, Jesus, we're struggling between X and Y. Wow, it looks like, you know, one of them really covers 2 of the first 3 and one of them is getting all 3 or whatever it is. So I think it's good for us to have some level of, it's almost like philosophical or vision of what we're trying to do in my mind.
yeah, I mean, I like having a lens to like
Right.
make the decisions through. I just, you know, we're voting on them and I just, you know, what does that really mean officially if we pass a budget that only hits 3 of them? I mean, you know,
Well, that says that we didn't meet our goal, but that's okay. I mean, we may not meet all our goals. I mean, we could put out something we're definitely gonna meet, and then we can be really hard and say 2.5 tax increase period, but I think we want the flexibility there to say if there's a need, we may not be able to make that. But these should be things I think we're striving towards.
And look, we've seen them, we
Yeah,
talked about them,
right.
I'm in total agreement with them, I just, you know, to what end, I wonder, like, you know, I think about them as a lens to which, you know, when we're looking at different options.
Do you think we need a preamble to this to state that our goal is, or I don't know, the goal of the goals is that we're going to, which is not the right wording obviously, but it's to balance across these essentially, so that maybe, Lisa, to your point, a lot of times, basically in the first three, to me, the way I read them, the only way you would ever pass all three of them is if you went to the least common denominator.
Right.
Right, like if you, in last year, it would have been like below social security, it would have been like a really small increase because we would have been trying to reduce the gap, like reducing the gap would be the dominating factor, I think, every year until we got to a place that we desired. So do we need to have a preamble that says something to the effect of,
Sure.
the goal is to balance these 7 or
Yeah.
these 9 different words in goal, I can't come up with
I
one
need
right now.
help with word crafting, but yes, I'm fine with that. Bert?
So it sets us
You
up the right
want me
way.
to do that now?
Can you, we can pass these in October, would you guys prefer
Let's
to
pass
table it
them in
with the
October and we'll do it
preamble?
for you.
Good?
I'll pass them now.
I don't wanna put words in your mouth though, Todd,
No,
it's up to you.
that's, I just, you know, we put the goals out there and now everybody says, okay, these are your goals, and they're goals, right? They're not requirements, they're not, you know, I just,
Yeah, I don't
I
wanna
think
do
more-
requirements.
no, I know, I guess more for like, part of the discussion is like, okay, we're voting for these goals. You know, we don't know what the next year is gonna be like,
For the next meeting, we could have a preamble, as you said, that explains
yeah,
what
Purpose.
we're trying to communicate, and especially to communicate to the other boards.
I think that's fair.
I like the idea of accepting them though, cause I get your point, but at the same time, I think if we don't agree on them, then in the heat of battle, we're almost like, well, I wasn't necessarily thinking that number 3 was legitimate, right?
yeah.
Not to say that we would do that, but
Well,
I
what
think
we-
it gives us some like sort of
Well,
bedrock
why
in the
don't we
conversation.
pass the goals and make a motion that Bert drafts some language introducing them for the letter, how's that?
Specifically Bert, I like that.
Only if I read that aloud at the next meeting.
Right, to be read aloud at the next
Showing off
meeting.
his reading skills.
Yeah, I guess my question really is, why are we voting on them? Like, what's the purpose
So that I
technically
can
of-
say in this letter that we're writing, here are the Board of Finance goals, just like the Board of Selectmen does, here are our goals, just like the Board of Ed
Okay.
does, here are
Okay.
our goals.
That's fine, I mean, I'll vote to,
Oh, is that not
approve them now
put in
without the
the
preamble.
Should we also say subject to review on an annual basis?
Oh,
Well, we-
subject to review, I
And maybe
mean,
that's implied.
subject to amendment even during the budget process, we
That's
can
fine.
change our
Yeah.
goals, yeah,
2026.
absolutely.
That's true, it does say 2026, okay.
Yeah, absolutely, we can always do that, 100%. And as the information changes, our thinking may change, absolutely.
Yeah.
No- Okay, so are people comfortable with taking the vote and then asking Bert to do some
Yeah,
draft language?
Yeah, I think we
Okay.
already had a motion in a second.
We do?
okay, and then
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and Bert, good luck with that. Okay, if you could get that to us a week in advance so that we can get that incorporated to the
Yes, ma'am,
document.
what's the date of that meeting?
I don't know.
In 12-point New York Times font, or Times New Roman, I'm sorry.
Okay. Am I done with my stuff here? What, Amy, could you pull up the long-term planning document? Wendy and Steve, if you need a copy of this, it's being posted on the thing, but there's hard copies over with Mark and Amy if you want it.
Yeah, I'm old school.
A lot of people are, I am too.
Oh, and old,
Thank you.
I'm older, so I can
One of the
say that.
things,
Distinguished.
I know, I'm sorry, that's why it's online, I couldn't get it to fit on one page. But one of the things that we are charged with by every Board of Finance is charged with is long-term planning, and so how do you think about what budgets look like? So what I did is, with Amy's help, because I'm not very good with the Excel spreadsheet, I said, well, what what if we started with assumptions and just said, well, if our grand list grows at 1.25% every year, which is our median grand list growth, and our budgets, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Schools grew by 3%, and our revenues were fairly consistent, and we had debt service as proposed at the end of last year as a fixed cost, you know, we would be at about 2% tax increases. And then I did, and although I haven't finished this analysis, I said, well, let me look at what Avon's assuming for their long-term planning. And their town budget, they assume a 2% increase and a 3% on the Board of Education.
2% increase on the grand list?
On the town budget,
No.
3% on Board of Education budget. But interestingly, when you look at the gross expenditures, which is also the if you look at the net expenditures, which is the tax levy, you'll see that they're about, in the later years, around 3%. And when I looked at Avon's, they were also about 3%. So I thought, okay, these are not terrible assumptions to use. The question then becomes, well, what happens when grand list is below? This all works great if we've got typical grand list growth. We had 0 grand list growth. We just saw the numbers that the grand list growth we were expecting has been wiped out, so we're back to 0 again. So can you then still do those sort of expenditure increases in the operating budgets of the town and the schools if you have 0 grand list growth? And one of the things you'll see in a lot of towns, instead of, while we do want to keep our capital investment, you know, make sure we're investing appropriately, a lot of them will keep the bonding amount at a number. Most of them are below 7%. And when you are growing your expenditures in the operating budget more than is typical, one way to keep the tax levy at a rate that perhaps our residents could accept, I don't know, is to reduce debt service, because that's the only lever you have. I know Mark is working on looking not just at this year's capital, but in the out years, how to get that down, because we are in a period where negotiations are coming in quite a bit higher than I've been doing this 15 years, higher than I've ever seen. So it's going to be hard to contain the operating budgets in that scenario. So that leaves the only lever in the out years is debt service. For the public, just as a reminder, we had planned for this. We're going to use about 1.3 million in reserves to reduce debt service, the cliff in fiscal year 2026 budget. The question is, should we be using more? We'll have to see how this plays out. But when you look down at the bottom, you can see what that means for tax increases dollar-wise, and that goes anywhere from about $227 in the 200s for tax increase every year, and you think, oh, that's not too bad, but over 10 years, that's suddenly you're paying $1,000 more. We already pay 20% more than Farmington in taxes, and more than Avon, and more than Glastonbury. So if that gap widens for us, when we talk about lower the mill rate, at least what we should do is stop the bleeding. Let's not get the mill rate to expand between them, but it will be this will be a challenge this year. But I thought that was sort of an interesting way to think. And then if these are sort of our earmarks, and then we could even change the town to 2 or 2.5, how close are we getting to these, and where are the levers that we can use? So that will be a challenge. It is in an Excel sheet, so we can send it to you and you can play with the numbers and move stuff around. But that's one way to think about it. And then as we move off that, one thing for the public, you'll notice that the tax levy in 2026 is estimated at 3.58, but the tax increase is only 2.43. And that's because what goes into taxes is not necessarily just what the budget increases. You get the grand list, there's other non-tax revenue, there's the limit on the motor vehicle tax at 32.46, all that stuff impacts the tax increase. So that's one place to start. It's just worth thinking about as sort of a jumping off point. Where are we? Are we above the line, below the line, as we think about what we want to do there? And then the next thing on your pages that I gave you is I had information timeline. And just for your, as you guys plan your vacations, to think about what's coming down the line. As I mentioned, October is a really big meeting for us. We'll have the quarterly report for 2025, the year-end close for 2024. The Social Security COLA will be announced. Right now, they're estimating about 2.5. So it's gonna be much lower than it has been in the past. The assessor grand list projection update will come in October. We'll have an updated budget model with grand lists and any other known revenues and debt service. I did ask Amy to reach out to our health advisor and our actuary to see if we can get some pension estimates early on that. And we'll have hopefully a draft budget calendar to review so that as people are planning their vacations, they'll know what they can work off. November, we'll have a regular meeting, hopefully aiming for a tri-board at that point, where we'll have fixed costs, and again, hopefully the actuary estimates for retirement and OPEB and health. And Amy will get us a copy of the last valuation report and the next valuation report, so we'll see where we are on that. And then any health advisor estimates for health contribution, hopefully we'll have those then. Those may come in later though. At our December meeting, I put that down as an alternate date for the tri-board because we don't know, things don't always work out as planned. And then in the past, this is the time when the Board of Finance has had sort of catch-up presentations from folks that we think we'd like to hear from. One year we had our actuary for retirement and the OPEB funds, one time Lockton came in. We haven't actually done a risk management report, so that might be something, but we don't have to decide that right now. But if there's some information you want, or someone to come in or do a presentation, let's try and plan it for December, so give some thought to that. And let us know and we can schedule that in if we can work that out. December 31st is the state deadline for filing our audit with OPM, and we just heard from Amy, we're on track for that. January, we'll have our regular board meeting. We'll have the second quarterly report, although there is a chance that will be filed with us in February because being realistic about the holidays, whether we can get that in on the 14th, I don't know. But that'll come in. I've asked for Amy to try and arrange with our auditor to do the audit presentation in January. As you recall, last year we did it in March, and that is insane to do that in the middle of the budget process. That did not work, so we don't want to do that in March. So that will be scheduled for either January or February. In February, we do have our second presentation from Fiducian. They come to the full board twice a year, so we'll schedule that. And the alternate auditor's presentation. The governor's budget is then released in February, so we'll have a good idea of sort of where we stand with revenue at that point. But generally, we're gonna budget the same revenue as last year, but there will be some known, so Amy may adjust that revenue assumption as we get closer, as she gets more information. We have some charter deadlines. March 1st is the charter deadline for the town manager to present his budget to the Board of Selectmen. So it will be presented before that date, and we don't have that date scheduled. By charter, March 15th, the Board of Education must present to the Board of Finance by March 13th. So if you're thinking about vacation, don't do the week before that or the days before that, because that's when that likely will be presented. Charter deadline, the Board of Selectmen must present to the Board of Finance by March 31st. We've talked with Amy and Mark, and they've been really good about working with us, trying to get that done earlier, so we aren't in a crunch before we have to do the Board of Finance hearing. By charter, we are required to do the Board of Finance hearing by April 10th, so that means we'll probably do it April 8th and 9th if past practice is prolonged. We'll have our third quarterly Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen report in March. So after we have the hearing, that will not be our last meeting.
March or April?
April, I'm sorry. We'll get the quarterly report, so we'll do a second public hearing, and that will likely be after school vacation and Passover and Easter, because we try not to schedule it during the school holiday when staff and the public are away. So those are things that are out there, but if folks have any problems with the dates in the next month, please let us know, let Amy know. We wanna make sure we have a quorum for all those.
But we don't have the dates.
We'll have the draft budget dates by next meeting, we hope. So we can all start planning our schedules. In terms of budget information we've asked for in the past, we've asked to see tax exemptions, a summary of tax and fee exemptions in the budget. We've asked to be shown all gross expenditures, whether or not they are statutory requirements for budgeting, and anything that can be budgeted, we just passed our policy, should be budgeted, whether it's required by law or not. We asked that we budget Aquarian dollars in the capital budget. Transfers, Mark, if you, in the budget book, if you could provide a narrative in the transfer section,
Sure.
it's very easy to forget what those were for.
No problem.
Thank you. Prioritization of capital and ranking of capital, thank you to Wendy and to your board for making that a priority and agreeing to that, Mark for agreeing to that. That will be really helpful as we can see how important capital is gonna be in this process. Performance measures, again, thank you, Mark, for your initiative on that, and Wendy for your pursuing of that. I think that's really critical, and it's also a best practice in budgeting, so, and it will really help with transparency and accountability, so thank you for that. And as we requested in the past for the Board of Education, if we could have that in the same format, a line item summary of their budget in the same format as the town does, so that we can just get comparisons. We appreciate all the information we get, but per Charter Section 807, if we could have it in the parallel columns just as the charter requires, that would be helpful. And then I think, Bert, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, about the Board of Education budget, one thing I find difficult to work with is that it doesn't present, well, let me put it this way, that salaries are essentially one line item, and they're not allocated to specific areas of activity or programs. So it's difficult to determine the actual cost of specific programs, whether it be administration or specific courses or clubs or activities. And I would like, if possible, very much like to see it done that in a way that shows the actual cost of various programs, so that we can weigh them in that way. Well, you're nodding, and I think you understand me, so.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other, we can ask, it's not a one and done, as people think of information, just to keep track of it. You don't have to go through, technically it should come through the board request for these information, but if you think of things, just let us know, we can discuss it at the meeting. Generally, it has been our practice that if any one board member requests it, we view it as a request of the full board, and unless somebody objects. So we've always given the courtesy to board members if they feel they need information to make it a request of the full board. Okay. Then the last thing before we move on, and I feel like I would just like to point out I'm pretty much on track, is I asked Amy to just do a quick review of capital, because that's gonna be such a topic of conversation. One of the things through our budget planning last year, any cuts to the fiscal year 2026 budget and capital will not save us money in the 2026 operating budget. But it will save us money down the line. And so I just asked Amy to sort of review how we plan our debt, some of the changes we made, and what would happen if we just didn't bond in 2026. And another scenario I asked for Amy is sort of the timing of the issuance. We go out for 10 million every 2 years. Well, what would happen if we didn't do 2026 borrowing and we went out for 5 million in the spring and then 5 million the next year and then get back on track? Part of that you can't always do because of the availability of cash to float. There's a cash flow problem, but to start thinking about sort of options that we can play with. But Amy, can you just walk us through how you come up with the debt numbers, what the planning scenarios would look like with or without?
So starting just with our capital improvement plan. So each of the colors that are together, these are your issuances. So fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 approved projects will be bonded in fiscal year 25. So we'll go in the spring of this year to bond for those. in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. We will bond for those projects in fiscal year 27 and then so on. If you go to the financing chart, essentially the fiscal year 25, oh, that's small, hold on. The fiscal year 25 numbers are pulling from the green. So these are the amounts that need to be bonded. They go into here, into our amortization schedule. I think we were at 4.25. I put it down to 4% given the feds are decreasing the interest rates. Changed that assumption, changed our structure to the 10 years, and then that gives us an estimated amortization schedule for this bond issuance. And then the same goes for the rest of the bond issuances, our 27 bond issuance, our 29, and et cetera. And then down here, it gives you your fiscal year budget impact. So our fiscal year 25 issuance will impact our 2026 budget. This leads you to your graph, which you're used to seeing. So anything that is in black is our existing debt, so we have to pay this. Anything that is in this blue for your fiscal year 25 issuance has to be issued. Those are approved projects that we need the money for. Everything else in the out years, this orange brown color and this peach color, these are projects that have not been approved, which we have you can make changes to.
Amy, the line showing the percent of the budget is, you're showing the 7% and the 8%. What are you assuming for budgetary growth?
I think I have it at 3.5%. And that's for town and board.
And if you change that to 3, what would that graph look like? That's based on the sheet I just showed you what was typical. So it gets a little bit lower. Or it should be
Is
our
that
debt
different?
higher, like a little bit higher, our debt service goes a little bit higher because the,
Well, the debt goes higher, the 7% line goes
Right.
lower, yeah. The gap closes.
then I asked Amy to take a look at what if we did nothing in 2026?
So if we do nothing for 2026,
By nothing you mean we don't.
We don't borrow, yeah, for that year, so the next year, the blue issuance would just be for 5 million, or I guess the orange issuance at that point,
yeah, the
right?
orange for the 2026.
You can see that then gives us quite a bit of capacity, cause I'm sorry, I'm a little bit colorblind, but that yellow above the orange, what is that color above the orange?
It's like a peach.
The peach. Peach. So that number is like the ghost of Christmas future. It may or may not come to be. But if our operating costs continue to grow at a pace way beyond anything we've ever seen, if that continues, then that's gonna be our only option. If we want to keep taxes low, and that's an if, because it depends on what the voters want and stuff like that. But one of the things I asked Amy to talk with our bond advisor, or to give some thought on her own, whether she needs the bond advisor or not, is we issue debt when we do the projects, float the cash, and then issue the debt, and then reimburse the floated cash. The reason why we don't issue in advance and then work is you don't want it sitting there earning interest, or you run into arbitrage problems and we lose our tax advantage of it being tax-free. It's a crazy system. But that's all dependent on our projects being done in a timely manner. So if our projects are being delayed and we don't need the cash, we obviously don't want to bond for it, because then it's sitting there and we run the risk of arbitrage. So it requires a little bit of a dance on Amy's part, working with the Public Works Director primarily, about when the cash is needed. And that does give some flexibility in terms of what it means to time your debt, is when do you issue the debt? And does it have to be 10 million every 2 years? Could you do 5 and 12? I mean, depending on, or do you need all the capital? So there is some flexibility there in the out years. And while we won't be able to do much in 2026, except perhaps use, depending on what capital reserve is left for more mill rate mitigation, you'll see in 2027, we shouldn't mitigate anything below 26, we're gonna have to take care of 2027 too. So there's not gonna be a lot we can do, and Amy did a good job with the number we had trying to preserve also the capital needs, so. But that's something Amy and Mark will need to evaluate, how to best use debt service, not create a cliff, meet the capital needs. So there's gonna be a lot, I know, Amy, I don't think you've had the chance to give that some thought yet, but.
No, I haven't looked at the cash flow yet. Initial thoughts, I don't think it would be an issue because we typically go out every other year anyway, so we're always floating something. I would just to be on a cautious side, I would ask our bond advisor if that change in practice would be permissible, and then debt issuances every year because we'd have to issue it the next year. I mean, it's just a lot of work. And then aside from that, that would only work if Mark can get to a zero bonding for fiscal year 26 between the Board of Education and the town. Otherwise, you're just creating that spike in the out years. So kind of a few factors that we need to look at before we commit.
Yeah, it's probably not realistic we're gonna do zero bonding, but we should only do absolutely essential bonding. And this is not a time to be doing optional projects in this until we get some groundless growth. This is really maintain our assets, public safety.
The other thing we could probably bake in here, and I'm not saying that we've got a crystal ball on interest rates, but I assume we're locking in the terms and we're bonding for how long?
10 years.
So I would think that if we felt that rates were at a level where, historical low or lower than a 5-year average or something like that, not making a bet on we think they're gonna go up or down, but more we think it's a competitive rate, I would think that should be baked in there as well. Meaning if rates are high, maybe that's when you get tight on it, and if rates are low, that's when you would maybe overbond a little bit.
Yeah, so that's when we did Latimer when rates were low, so that's why we did Latimer then.
Right.
Of course, that didn't work out as planned, but that was the idea behind doing it at Latimer when rates
It didn't work out because what, rates kept going down, or?
No, rates went up by the time we issued.
Oh, I got you.
So we ended up paying more. But now we're in kind of the higher period and we have no grant list, so this is a time where you pull back a little
Got it.
bit. But I
Yep.
agree, when rates are low, that's when you build.
Right.
100%.
Also, as rates come down, we can look at reissuing the debt and take advantage of the low
Got it.
rate.
Okay, great.
How long do we have to wait to do that? Is there any time period?
It depends on the issuance. I'd have to look at the official statement. It's usually between 3-5 years, something like that. So we
Latimer's obviously the big one. Unfortunately, the timing hit at the top of the rate, right?
Yes, but by fiscal year 26 or 27, our first issuance, about 12 million, will probably be at that availability, so we can give it a shot.
Right. So that's something that would be great
And
to.
just so I'm understanding, when you say reissue, we could prepay one slug and then reissue at a lower rate?
You don't prepay, you basically like refinancing your mortgage.
Okay. Got it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Cause I just pulled up, so are you kind of saying, for 25, 26, anything that we have in our capital plan labeled as bonded would potentially just be off the table?
Not off the table, but should be looked at extremely carefully as to, is this an essential need? If it's a nice to have, a wanna have, that it doesn't mean don't ever do it, but it might mean find a grant or delay it a few years until we see some groundless growth.
And
I mean, I don't know,
most of
I
it is-
we haven't seen the budgets, but the initial projections are not great. COLA's coming in at 2.5. We know what the settlements are, those drive 75% of your budget, 85% of the Board of Ed budget. So we have an idea that it's gonna be a tough year. Unless I'm missing something. Am I missing something, Mark, there?
No, you're not.
And we're coming off 2 of the highest tax increases in the 15 years I've been in town. So, anything we can do, I was talking with someone and he said to me, look, we know our taxes are gonna have to go up, make sure you need it. I thought that was good advice. As opposed to want it.
Sure.
right? So that, just wanted to do a preview of that because, debt service will help us. It is worth thinking about this year because the out years, things are not trending any better. Maybe we'll get a great grand list report from Francine, but a year ago it was, as you saw, pretty zero for the next 4 years. So if that doesn't change, this is one area we can look at. It's not ideal. That's where we are. Any thoughts from anyone? What are you thinking?
I mean,
It is what it is, right?
our goal is to not add more debt till the grand list grows, so that's.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of tells the story of how we're gonna get through the next few years if there's no grand list growth.
Right.
Right. Let me see if I got through everything.
Strike oil.
Yeah, there's the oil and the lottery ticket thing. Amy or Mark, is there something else you think we should be thinking about? Are we not thinking about this in the right way? Something you want us to reassess or?
No,
Yeah.
Chair, and we appreciate the dialogue. I think it was really good and strong and well timed. I mean, we certainly at the staff level, we completely agree with everything you've said. Was very impressed frankly with your goals that you accepted tonight. I would just, to the extent the board might consider prioritizing some of them, I mean, I don't wanna make that, I know you're working hard on the preamble, but a couple of them might be more important, if you could signal which ones are more important than others. I mean, as you pointed out, some are in conflict with each other, right? I think I could just, from my perspective, one of the ones that I really like is the right sizing our mill rate with our peers. That was an impactful goal to me, right? If we are X% above Avon or Farmington, if we can come to you with proposed budgets and to our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen with proposed budgets that incrementally close that gap, and we can check that box, I'd be proud to do that. I think that's good. I forget where I said it today, but incrementally, I think I feel more confident. Try to get there all at once is always a bit of a problem, no matter how you look at budgets.
We
But
can take off 2026 and just put goals and they can be our long-term goals as
yeah,
well.
or make them for 2 years instead of 1, which
Yeah.
is something I shared with my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, and my own town manager goals, which were recently adopted by the Board of Selectmen, are for a 2-year period. So, they're aspirational, but we need more than 6 months to achieve them, obviously, especially when so much ties to grand list growth. Our development director tells me, we're pretty much built out, so what are we doing to grow the grand list? I mean, really, are we building up? Are we thinking about zoning changes? Are we,
Thinking about not doing reductions.
well, you're not gonna, I mean, as you heard me say last year, you're not gonna close this budget gap by counting your paper clips and your pens. You're gonna need some big innovative thoughts as to how you can, chop off large amounts at a time. And that's what we're working on. We've challenged all our department heads to think outside the box. Not at all pushing back on the idea of bonding as close to zero as possible, even though it wasn't that long ago that the guidance was 10 million every 2 years. But we're with you, and if we've gotta move those goalposts, I think this is the time to do it. As our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen know, we're bifurcating, is maybe the right word, moving the capital planning out of the normal budget, so where it was all done before at one time, now we're getting into capital budgeting in advance, and the Board of Selectmen will be prioritizing things soon. So I think those are really good steps from my point of view. By the time we get to working on the operating side, we will already have addressed capital and CNR. Whereas last year, and every year, we've tried to do it all at once. And I think as things get more complicated, and we have the biggest challenges, you need to break off the pieces. And so doing capital separately ahead of time is good. Getting guidance like this from your board earlier is good. Us giving you the town manager budget to the Board of Selectmen earlier is good. We're making all the right steps, and we
We're grateful
appreciate,
for that. Thank
really
you.
appreciate the dialogue and the opportunity to have even the conversations outside of the the boardroom where we could just, run some ideas by you. It's very valuable.
I have an additional comment. One thing that is frustrating, trying to grow the grant list and things like that, we have projects that may or may not fit the Simsbury character that are in front of the zoning commission that could be adding to our grant list that are rejected because they don't meet what the community wants, and then the community, those communities are happy to not do it, whereas we have the other people that don't want the taxes to go. So your first item there is like the community, there's two different communities that want two different things.
Right.
And that's what's that's frustrating to some of us, because there are opportunities out there to, that can grow the grant list, and we have no say over them, and they don't know your goals, right?
Right.
They're only following that, so I just putting that out there. I'm sure if zoning people are listening, they'll be mad at me, but there may be some certain sacrifices or things that we'll have to do in order to keep Simsbury affordable.
Yeah, or pay more taxes if
Or
we're
pay more
not willing to
taxes
do
and
that,
just-
yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of frustrating.
But there's a little bit of balkanization of policymaking built into our government now, as you just pointed out, is that we have separate boards making decisions that affect overall policy.
Yeah.
Is there a way within the existing structure we can get these boards
So the
to
charter
communicate?
commission got impaneled,
Yeah.
is getting impaneled. I mean, I'm just saying, like, West Hartford, their town council is their planning and zoning, make their decisions there. I mean, I'm not asking to do that, but, they do have a say.
That's the struggle I have with comparing mill rates between towns, is
Yeah.
it's not apples to apples.
Well, I almost said that when you had item 3 up there, you're saying just the same mill rate, but you have to say, and we said this during the budget, the same mill rate for comparable services. We can't just say our mill rate has to be the same as West Hartford. So if the word peer means peer in the sense of services and everything else, then that makes sense, but just because Avon, they may not have the same things we have, and they may have less of a community structure, I don't know. So I agree with what you're saying.
So there is, I agree to that, which is why this board has for almost a decade asked for performance metrics and metrics so that we can do those comparisons and see that. But the Board of Finance has for the last 20 years chosen Avon, Glastonbury, and Farmington because they are similar. When people buy their homes, they look at the schools and say they're similar. They look at the community, they say they're similar. Real estate agents show the same areas. So that's why those have been chosen for that reason. But you're right, there may be a reason why people are, I call it the lovely tax. I'm willing to pay a little bit more to live in Simsbury because it's a lovely place to live. And people are willing to do that. At some point, though, that gap gets too big. Is 20% more, are our schools 20% better than Farmington? Yes. I didn't say that publicly. But people are gonna start to evaluate that. Is it 20, when is that gap too much? The gap might not be enough to cause people to move, although I've had citizens call me and tell me they're moving, they can't afford to live here. But at some point, that gap becomes a business deciding, should I pay the lower taxes in Farmington or should I pay the lower taxes in Simsbury? It may impact decisions to move in. And when that starts happening, it lowers everyone's home values. So the question is, when is that tipping point? And what are people willing to pay for? But you're right, Todd's right, you're right, it's a balance. Some people, yeah, I'll pay for that. And then we've got 22% of our population who can't pay for it. And how do we balance those two competing needs? There's no easy answer there. So, but those are the things. But if there was, we wouldn't need a Board of Finance and we wouldn't need a Board of Selectmen. We were elected to weigh everyone's opinions and to evaluate data, but also to make judgments. And hope that we are meeting, as Nancy Pelosi said, public sentiment is everything. Hopefully we're delivering what our citizens want, whether that's affordability or a beautiful place or great schools or we want it all, we just, can we get it all and not pay for it? I don't know. There's no
I think
easy.
it's a great point. I also think that there's it's not just a point in time. I think it's a trend, because I think some of the second order statistics are actually pretty interesting, right? Because I want to say we have a very high ratio of students per capita, and so when you look at that, you could argue that the higher our taxes are, that's going to keep increasing because it's going to spiral, because who's going to want to pay extra here? people that are putting their kids in our grade school system, and then that's gonna spiral. And then even though the superintendent's gonna come in and say, my average cost per student is competitive, that's great, but we still have a huge amount, like it just keeps growing, right? So there is an equilibrium here that I think we have to search for.
Yeah, but I think that's a fair point, Lenny, it's not like a formula. And it is dependent about what the public wants, and we have an obligation, and we want to hear from the public, that's why we hold multiple public hearings, and that's part of the process, but yeah, I mean, it's easy to pass a budget when cash is flush, it's hard to do it. So I don't know, I don't have any answers, but well, and it's not just our job, I mean, we have 3 boards working on it, we've got professional staff and we got members of the public who are very engaged, and so it's a community process, and hopefully we'll try and reach a point where we get to the bulk of what the community wants, and so far we've been in good shape, we had 2 high tax increases, but the voters supported them. That did not happen in Avon and Canton. So is that a cautionary tale, or is that the difference between Canton and Avon and Simsbury? I don't know. So, on that happy note, minutes. Art House sent in some changes to the minutes, as did I. We circulated them, if folks are okay with.
I think I need to abstain from this one because I wasn't there.
Technically, you don't have to, but
Really?
yeah. Yeah, that's what Bob DeCrescendo used to advise, but I don't know if that's still the case.
I've been
I'll
told that.
abstain.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm just acknowledging that
Can
they
we
look
pass
nice.
the minutes with 3 votes?
Yes, because we have a quorum present, so we can,
Quorum's 4.
quorum's 4, so I only need 3 to pass. If it's unanimous, it's passed.
For the minutes, yes. I think for everything else, I need 4.
No, we don't need 4, we only, for everything, for a full quorum, yeah, we would need 4, but it's a quorum of those present.
Not my understanding, Chair,
Oh, really?
but it didn't matter because every vote tonight was unanimous, so not an issue for tonight, and I believe for the approval of minutes, you need a majority of the quorum. But for other action, the argument could be made that you need 4.
All right.
All
Well, we
4.
could table this till next meeting if you'd like.
Just the minutes, I think we're good.
All right.
Well, let's see how it goes.
We know that Art will approve.
Yes, because he already sent in his changes. All right, as long as we adopt Art's changes. All right, may I have a
I
motion
move to approve the minutes
as amended?
as amended.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Yay. All right, may I have a
I
motion to
move to
adjourn?
adjourn.
Second.
Jesus.
All in
Aye.
favor, please say aye. Thank you.